Hello and a warm welcome to African Perspective on SABC News. I'm Simphiwe Ngongwane standing in for Tsepiso Makwetla. On tonight's show, a sit-down with the former president of Botswana, Ian Khama. But first, let's take a look at these stories. The African Continental Free Trade Area is now in force after 22 countries ratified and deposited their instruments of ratification at the African Union. Experts, however, say the real work of implementation must now begin, which will include drafting and making national several legal frameworks. Sarah Kimani reports.
Kigali, March 2018.
We need to summon the required political will for the African Continental Free Trade Area to finally become reality.
Just over a year later, and the agreement entered into force on Thursday last week, a historic achievement that ushered in the world's largest trading market of 1.2 billion people with a combined GDP of $2.5 trillion. The African Free Trade Zone will cut tariffs to zero on 90% of goods for member states, a move that will boost intra-African trade from 15 to 25% or $50 billion to $70 billion by 2040, according to the Economic Commission of Africa.
What is at stake is the dignity and well-being of Africa's farmers, workers, and entrepreneurs, particularly women and youth.
The operational phase of the agreement will be launched in July during the African Union Heads of State Summit in Niger. Before that, the AU Trade Commission must settle outstanding issues, including the rules of origin of goods, as well as schedule of tariff concessions in trade in goods.
The CFTA, when it comes into force, all the duties and other barriers to trade within Africa will be removed progressively. When that happens, this gives the business people a cost advantage.
Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, is yet to sign on to the agreement, with fears that a free trade area will hurt its domestic markets. Others that have not signed are Eritrea and Benin. Critics of the agreement, however, say the agreement may not work due to poor infrastructure, a possible clash of the AfCFTA with other third-party agreements that countries and regional blocs have entered into, as well as a vast economic disparities that exist among African economies.
A bigger market with no capacity to supply, henceforth, we don't expect much transactions in terms of total volumes. You see, you can have a bigger market, but do you have the capacity to produce so that you trade in that market?
They say only after these issues are conclusively solved will the agreement move from symbolism to reality, a real benefit for the continent. Sarah Kimani, SABC, Kenya.
The UN's Emergency Relief Coordinator has warned that many people could die if the international community doesn't provide hundreds of millions of dollars in order to stave off a likely famine in parts of the Horn of Africa by the end of the year. Mark Lowcock announced that he was releasing $45 million from the UN Central Emergency Fund to kickstart a preventive and early action response after drought-like conditions were experienced during that region's heavy rainfall period of April to June.
The worst affected countries, Somalia, Ethiopia and Kenya, as predictions of a good rainfall evaporated despite expectations of an above-average rainfall season.
What we're projecting now is really quite an alarming situation where Somalia, Ethiopia and Kenya will have a very substantial problem by the end of the year. And I'm particularly worried about Somalia, where by the end of the year we think there could be 5.4 million people in dire straits, 2.2 million of whom could be in a really acute situation.
Lowcock says the aid agency drought response plans for the region require some $710 million for 2019, with a particular emphasis on Somalia, that in 2011 became and remains the only country to have experienced a famine in the 21st century. The famine in Somalia in 1992 killed 300,000 people and in 2011 cost 250,000 lives, with warnings here that acting early will also be less expensive. The UN's humanitarian chief says he can't imagine stakeholders and donors allowing his predictions to unfold.
I don't think the world wants to tolerate another famine in Somalia, and there's basically two choices. We can have a quick response now, which would be cheaper, reduce human suffering, and more effective, or we can wait for a few months until we get all those horrible pictures on our TV screens and our social media of starving kids. I'm voting for the first response for obvious reasons, because it is cheaper, more humane and more effective.
Lowcock emphasised the need for systemic early action as global warming and climate change increasingly makes early warning systems critical.
In the past, what we were seeing was problems of the sort we've got now once every 7 years or so. It now looks to us as though this is a problem repeating itself every 2 or 3 years, and it's drought related. There's not really any question in my mind that these more frequent droughts, as well, by the way, as more frequent storms and cyclones and so on, are related to global warming and climate change. I don't think there's any question about that.
Ethiopia is experiencing its second consecutive drought season, while Kenya's arid and semi-arid regions were hard hit by a lack of rain during the wet season earlier this year. Sherman Brycepease, SABC News, New York.
Welcome back. Former Botswana President Ian Khama has been at loggerheads with his successor, President Mokgweetsi Masisi. Many have accused Khama of trying to micromanage Masisi, who was nominated by Ian Khama himself to be his successor. Speaking to the SABC's foreign editor, Sophie Mkwena, Khama has denied these allegations but admitted that he has left the Botswana Democratic Party, a political party that was founded by his late father, Sir Seretse Khama, due to tensions in the party. Our foreign editor, Sophie Mkwena, started off by asking Khama on the reasons for this fallout. Well, attempts to get reaction from President Masisi were unsuccessful as he's currently in the United States, but his office has promised that he will respond to these allegations leveled against him upon his return to Botswana. We now leave you with that interview.
We are witnessing acts of intolerance by the leadership against other members of the party. We see people who may not necessarily be supporters being harassed. When the former foreign minister stood in a leadership contest against him, the very next day he dropped her from his cabinet in an act of intolerance. We have seen him even doing similar things to opposition parties, like the main opposition leader, the leader of the opposition. He had brought in 2 aircraft to assist in his campaign to take him around the country, and they found something about the way the aircraft were brought in to have them taken out of Botswana. And yet they did it in 2014 when I was in office, and it never occurred to us that we should try to find ways of preventing them getting around the country. But just own up to the fact that the opposition is growing and they're going to be able to access more assets of that nature. So instead of just saying to them, okay, if there was something under the customs arrangements that they hadn't quite complied with, just to say, look, fill in this form and sort it out, and then you carry on and use the aircraft, just to remove them entirely. So state organs being used against his political opponents as well, something we've never had. We've got about 3 members of parliament who have now been suspended from the party. One of them is here in South Africa, having left Botswana because he feared for his life, only because he was the campaign manager for the lady I mentioned in question, and that he was also wanting to stand for Secretary General against the incumbent that Masisi supports. So those are just some of them. You know, the intimidation, the harassment that goes on is contrary to our culture and the way we've done things in our country for so many years, and the reputation, the good reputation that we have acquired as a result. And I just felt that really a time has come that one cannot be associated with that because it is not part of our DNA.
You actually endorsed his candidature. to become the president of the party, but also your successor?
I didn't endorse his candidature. I actually was the one who nominated him and put him up before Parliament to be my successor. And during that period, I was convinced that, I had selected the right person. Of course, there were others I could have chosen as well. But what happened, as I have just described, is this self-interest that he has. It's all about him, not about the people. The intolerance I've just mentioned, the arrogance that I've also talked about. This is foreign to our way of doing things in our country, as you well know. And that is what's happened. So it's the actions that are taken, on a regular basis in the country. I too have been a victim of some of these actions that they've carried out against others. And so it's been very clear. So I waited all this time. A whole year has gone by, and I just thought, no, maybe it'll get better. Maybe he's just settling in. And he'll find his feet one day, and people will talk to him and say, no, you need to calm down a bit on this, on that one. Just adapt the culture, our culture of democracy that we have always prided ourselves of. But it's just on an ego trip as far as he's concerned. It's all about him and the presidency, the trappings of office, and enjoying it to the full extent.
You have been accused of interfering with government.
In other words, you don't want to let it go. As a former president, you still want to have influence.
There are examples based on what you've said. I can remember, even in our region, Southern Africa, I can remember that a president who had to step down or what have you would remain the leader of the party because they wanted to continue to influence things. They wanted to be able to influence who was going into the cabinet. And eventually they were driven out of their parties because that was seen as interference. So when I stood down as the president. I stood down as the leader of the party. I'm not, here in South Africa, I believe a former president remains a member of the NEC, of the ANC, for example, right? Not in Botswana. That doesn't happen. So I don't belong today as we speak to any structure. I'm not involved in anything in government. And that's how I like it. So next time they say that to you, ask them exactly what and how is he interfering in government, unless they gave you an example already.
President Masisi's supporters are arguing that you are aggrieved because he had to change certain policies, particularly on hunting. Did you question his decision to change the hunting policy?
They only decided very recently, you may know, to lift the ban on hunting. It was a recent event, it was in the last week or so, or two. What I'm talking about has been going on for over a year, just over a year. So it couldn't have been that. But even if he had decided to reverse that policy right at the beginning, what they've done recently, they did a year ago. Because that doesn't mean to say that because I'm no longer president, I cannot disagree with any policies they may introduce now or in the future. I'm a citizen of Botswana now, and citizens are free to express their views on what the government is doing. So being a former president doesn't mean to say, I must keep quiet about what's going on in the country. So yes, I definitely disagree with that, because they are going about it in the wrong manner. And he was very much part of that policy and supported it. So it's just a bit surprising that someone who supported it and everything suddenly now is changing. But like I said, he's the president. He can introduce new policies if he wants to.
His argument is that...
But I didn't leave the party because of that.
His argument is that the damage that's been caused by these elephants in terms of the lives of people, it was a question of choosing whether you continue to have these elephants in their big numbers or you scale down to ensure that you don't experience these incidents.
We have a lot of elephants in Botswana, and they have, in certain areas, wreaked havoc on communities where they stay and on their crops. That is not in any doubt. And people have lost their lives because of that. But then, why do we have so many elephants? One is because there has been large-scale poaching in some neighboring states, not all neighboring states, but in some. And a lot of these elephants have come into Botswana seeking safe haven. Secondly, before this current rainy season, we had 2 rainy seasons where there was a lot of rain countrywide. And elephants, by their nature, when that happens, they spread out. They go away from their traditional grounds, and therefore, as they spread out, they were coming into contact with more and more people. Their crops and the communities and everything where they lived. But Botswana belongs to an organization called CASA, the Kavango Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area. And in that treaty, 5 countries, Angola, Zambia, Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe, have come together to share the resource and to come up with objectives on how to deal precisely with this issue. That is not being followed by us or by the other countries. And so the effort should be to ensure that we help Angola, we help countries like Zambia, who can benefit tremendously from an iconic species like the elephant, by depopulating Botswana of its elephants, and these elephants would go back naturally to their original habitat. And we need to help them get protection improved, and those animals, because we see that the animals tend to try to go back and then return because of the poaching on the other side. Similarly, in our own country, because I should tell you, whether you have, like now, they say we've got about 130,000 to 140,000 elephants. But let me show you that even if we had 1 elephant in Botswana, 1 elephant, it would still want to go into people's crops. It would still probably endanger some lives. Then what do? Do we kill the last elephant that we have? So is that really the answer? So they've come up with hunting 400 elephants a year out of a population of 130,000. Is that going to make such a big difference when the birth rate is 5%, which is about 650 elephants a year? So the birth rate is higher than the none. So if they think they're cutting down the numbers, they're not cutting down the numbers in that regard. What they are doing is they've been lobbied by foreign hunting groups. And you know how lobbyists go about lobbying, right? To allow hunting to start again in Botswana. And that hunting ban was a hunting ban for all species of wildlife, not just for elephant. It was for all species, so that we could grow that resource to make Botswana the tourist destination that it is today. And we have exceeded everybody on this continent, including yourselves, in that regard, and won a lot of awards as a result. So they then say people are losing their lives because of elephants. From 2009 to 2018, about 40 people lost their lives, which is an average of about 4 a year. So lives must be saved, I agree entirely. But then when you look at road accidents, in 1 year, 2017, we lost 6 times more people due to alcohol consumption in road accidents than were killed by elephants the same year. So if he's so concerned about people losing their lives, why did he then reverse another policy where we reduced the hours, the operating hours that you can sell alcohol? One of the first things he did was to extend the hours that alcohol could be sold. And we all know in our countries, alcohol drinking abuse is a problem, and people are losing their lives. So it's just a farce that he was trying to say is for to try and reduce loss of life when he has extended the hours of operation for selling alcohol. And then in the same year, we lost 4 times the amount of people killed by elephants by people on our roads crashing into domestic animals. But we don't say now we must go and shoot cattle. We don't. Cattle also go into people's crops. This was told to me many times when I was in office. Cattle go in and eat people's crops, just as much as elephants go and eat people's crops. And we've got many, many more cattle than we have elephants. But we don't say we're going to cull cattle. So it was just an excuse, I want to assure you, to open up the hunting because of these lobbyists from outside. Because if you talk about hunting 400 elephant, that big number, that's culling.
You took a decision to abandon the party that was started by your father. Don't you see this as betraying what he stood for and what he wanted in that country? Are you not feeling guilty that you have betrayed him?
Abandoning my father's party that belonged to both my parents actually, I've said that the party...
Is this not a betrayal of your father's dream and efforts?
It's not a betrayal, because what my father wanted his party to do was to deliver and develop for the people of Botswana, the nation, and what it has achieved up to now. That's what he wanted, and the BDP was the instrument to do that. If the instrument is now broken, does that mean that we are going with the instrument, or we are going with the country? So it's not a betrayal. What is happening now is a betrayal done by the leadership, not by the membership. I'm not talking about the membership of the BDP. I'm just talking about the leadership. So that's where the betrayal has come from. So for me, yes, if you want to say I've betrayed the BDP, fine. But at least I am clear in my own mind, I have not betrayed the country. And I'm doing this for the country. So where to go from now? Right now I haven't joined any party. I'm watching to see the other members of the BDP who have left it are setting up, are setting up a new party, and I'm supporting that new party. But going to the elections, I've said that I'm going to support who I think are the best candidates to take this country forward across the party line, including some from the BDP. So it'll be some from the BDP, some from the opposition, and indeed some from the new party.
One of the opposition leaders in South Africa, Malema, not being allowed to visit Botswana. And now we have a situation where Bridget Khatebe is not allowed to go to Botswana unless she's got a visa. How do you respond to this?
Well, first of all,
is history repeating itself?
No, there was never any history. That history you've related is false. You know as well as I do that when you're in opposition, they will accuse you of everything under the sun. They will do anything to try to discredit you. And that's why I would throw it back to you and say, give me one example where they were prevented from having a meeting, the opposition. There isn't a single one, not at all, not at all. And if you look at Botswana's rankings and ratings, its world rankings and ratings for democracy, peace and stability, when I was in office, you will see it was improving annually. So if that was the case, would there be this backlash against what is currently happening? If you're talking about dictatorship, it's now that is starting to rear its ugly head. So that one I discard entirely.
President Masisi is currently in the US. There are reports or allegations that you have mobilized people to go and protest where he is. How far true are these reports?
I've seen the same things on social media as you have, but I wish to assure you I had nothing to do with that. If you want to know who orchestrated those protests, is him as a result of this blood policy that he has introduced. of reintroducing hunting. And I just want to emphasize that there are ways and means that they need to put in their efforts to stop elephants going into people's crops. And there's a gentleman called Dr. Michael Chase, who is an elephant expert, a researcher, a renowned one, who has come up with low-cost solar-powered technology to do that, to protect people's crops. There's also other methods that you can use. So instead of, doing all these things that they are doing, they need to see how they can prevent this and not roll back a resource that we have benefited from. Our economy revenues have gone up. Employment creation in the tourism sector has gone up because Botswana's tourism is mostly based on wildlife. And we've been able to grow our numbers and attract visitors from all around the world, including in our own country, to come and marvel at what we have to offer. And now this is all being reversed with these policies. So we now see, you talked about the protests. We've already seen a drop in tourist numbers because people are now starting to boycott our country as a result of this.